Hello, I'm Tara All, and I am going to share today some things about Saturn and Saturn as the stabilizer part of us in our lives. And this is part of the Evolutionary Astrology Zoom group meetings. And I am going to stop periodically and ask for feedback. I don't have a specific chart to work with today, but I am very interested in people sharing thoughts and ideas and experiences. So for me, this is really my positive spin on Saturn, and Saturn is strong in my chart and something that I have learned to use as a strength. And of course, where Saturn sits in our chart, that is where we want to strengthen ourselves. And I want to start by giving just a little outline of what I'm going to talk about today. And Saturn shows us where and how we really want to earn it, whatever that it may be for us. And I really like this quote by Liz Green that says, "Human beings do not earn free will except through self-discovery, and they do not attempt self-discovery until things become so painful that they have no other choice." And I think this is partly why we associate Saturn with so many difficult things, because the part in us that is reflected by Saturn is the part that has to get pushed into the corner, has to get pushed uncomfortable enough to do something different. Saturn can oftentimes be where we just become comfortable with the status quo of how we live. And it can take a lot of energy to move us out of that inertia. So the ideas I'm going to talk about today are all really on the principle of Saturn being about building our own security, and in building that security, giving ourselves freedom. It is my belief that we don't live in true freedom unless we have built a foundation of security. Otherwise, it's much more like chaos. So first of all, I'm going to talk about staying with ourselves, stabilizing and strengthening. And then secondly, how and what we need to learn from just the Saturn perspective. Certainly learning comes in all different ways, represented by pieces and the alchemy in our chart and transits and whatnot, but this in particular to Saturn, how Saturn really shows a big part of our potential contribution to the world. And then specifically, Saturn shows about what we need to build or how we need to build and fill our space with ourselves. I feel like the density that comes with Saturn is important, because filling and owning, taking up our space is a big part of how we embody in this lifetime. And then some of you may be familiar with Gregory Nalbandian's technique, which is called Saturn, well, he may not call it that, but it's Saturn as our builder, and it incorporates Saturn with the north node of the moon and then the Pluto polarity point. So I'll touch on that because it really speaks to me. And I think it's something, especially conversation-wise, I'd love to stop and open it up at that point and see if anyone else has played with it and what you think of it. And then finally, Saturn as where we truly can be masters and wise individuals. Learning to stay, stabilize, and strengthen. You know, when we say stay, that is can be interpreted lots of different ways. I think that as humans, oftentimes we don't want to stay with what is. You know, we don't want to stay in the present. So we are going back to the past and pulling on old memories and old reactions. And then we also are going to the future, which is really us taking the past and extrapolating it out into a future. But we're not so comfortable staying in the present moment. And so I think part of the gift of Saturn is wherever it sits or whatever it's touching, whatever it is interacting with, that it's teaching us to stay. You know, I think at one point in time in my early classes with Laura Nalbandian, we talked about Saturn like being in a cold room by ourselves, you know, really having to figure it out. And I think that can be true, but I think there's so much benefit in staying long enough. So I say here, stick around long enough to receive the blessings of whatever it is you're doing. Some simple ones I can think of is if we stick around in fear long enough, because fear is suppressing the excitement of life. At least that's one way to look at it. The flip side of fear is excitement. So if we stay in our fear long enough, eventually we start to feel our excitement. When we stay with grief or sorrow, eventually our heart starts to open. That's what that's doing. When we stay with our anger, we start to become really vital, but we tend to not want to stay long enough to receive the blessings. And fortunately or unfortunately, sitting with Saturn feels like the hard knocks, but it brings us to the side of receiving our blessings, which in my mind come from being able to really stay. So when I'm looking even in a chart at someone's ability to stay with something, right, stay with themselves, to have patience, to be with a certain aspect or area, Saturn will tell me a lot about that person's ability to do that. Not where they've evolved with it, because they may have moved forward, but their natural sort of staying power, if you will. Stabilizing within ourselves. So grounding, having healthy boundaries, which allows us to move from reacting to responding. It's this reacting to responding builds on the polarity from moving from the Cancer to the Capricorn side of things as well. But Saturn really is that. It's like we respond. And there's a stability in knowing that I don't have to know the answer to everything, but I know that I can respond and not just take action off of my reaction. And then the strengthening, which to me, when we're accounting for ourselves, things in our lives, and then we are responding, we're building those muscles. In other words, the muscles that show that, wow, I don't just have to react, I now have this other choice. So like anything else, the more I do it, the stronger those muscles get, and the less fatigue they get, the less of a shock and painful it is after I have an initial workout, for example. So the discipline and patience around this leads to maturity. And at the heart of Saturn, it is wanting to mature us. It's a part of us that wants to mature, the part that wants to be, adult, if you will. I don't so much like that word, but I think you get the feel. So some simple things here, and I just threw in ideas. It's a very short list of examples, but taking it by sign and house, what do we want to stay with, stabilize, and strengthen when it comes to Saturn? If we have Saturn in Aries or the first house or related signatures, it's a big part of staying with, stabilizing, and strengthening ourselves, even our own raw energy, taking initiative and action, impulse. So I think about this, can I stay with my impulsive, spontaneous nature? Can I really, can I stay and feel that? And then learn to respond to it instead of reacting. And we all know how reactionary Aries in the first house can be. So Saturn in the first house is a really important placement as far as strengthening the self to respond to life and not just react to life. And to take the use of the most raw, potent, cardinal, fire life force energy that there is, and give it some stability. So in the same vein, Taurus and the second house, this would be around resources, self-sufficiency, worth, value, essential needs. So sometimes Taurus in the second house can be really staying with how we value or love ourselves, which at times is not always where we would like it to be. But can we stay with it? Can we stay in the feeling of not being self-sufficient, for example, or not feeling worthy enough? Because that gives us strength in that area, and the flip side is always available. Like a shadow side of something is never there without its opposite side. Gemini in the third house, this could be with our thoughts, our mind, reasoning, ideas, communication. So we're strengthening with this Saturn placement, strengthening these pieces. With our words, how we use our words, how we use our body language, how we communicate in all ways, how we work with the mind. A Saturn in the third house, for example, sometimes there are limitations around communication, coming up with the right language. Sometimes it can be slow to figure things out with that left brain. It's not because that capacity is not there, but there's something about staying and stabilizing and strengthening that needs to happen in that area. Cancer in the 4th house, this would be the realm of emotions, reactions, psychological nature, our roots. You know, can I stay with my feelings as they're arising? You know, can I stay and stabilize my being from the center, putting my weight down, right? Saturn is like, you know, put my weight down into something while my reactions and emotions are happening. Leo in the 5th, creative self-expression. The full radiance of ourselves. You know, can I stay in my full radiance? You know, sometimes that's not comfortable. You know, Saturn in the 5th house or Saturn in Leo is having a lot of lessons around that, coming from the heart. Virgo in the 6th, staying with our humanity, you know, humility, true service, the details of day to day. So Saturn in the 6th house can be the need to really strengthen the ability to stay and pay attention and be on task with the mundane details of humanity. You know, it could be that in past life experiences or earlier in this life experience, someone with that placement and perhaps didn't have to pay attention to those things. You know, maybe they were off in Pisces land, 12th house land, where that didn't have to happen. You know? So now the lessons are, you know, can I stay here? So it's really like, for me, I can even think about the sentence, you know, how well do I stay with my fill in the blank? For me, my Saturn's in the 4th house. So it really is, how well do I stay with my reactions? Well, I tend to react to my reactions. So it's been a slow maturation process for me to stop and stay. You know, sometimes staying is all I can do. You know, stay when that's happening or when it's triggering fears. So Libra in the 7th house, this can be relationships, harmony, balance, equality, fairness. You're really needing to strengthen those parts of oneself and our experiences of that nature. Scorpio in the 8th, vulnerability. How well can I stay with my vulnerability? How well can I stay in my moment when I know someone might penetrate and get into a part of me that I don't want to share? You know, intimacy, transformation, power. Sagittarius in the 9th, with my natural self, you know, my natural beingness, personal truth, confidence, beliefs. Capricorn in the 10th, boundaries, self-authority, our public self, or responsibility. You know, Saturn in the 10th house or in Capricorn oftentimes has issues around authority figures in life, and that has a lot to do with the fact that that's usually projected issues because we're not owning and staying and stabilizing that part of ourselves. Aquarius in the 11th, can I stay with my individuation? You know, my uniqueness, me being different, the ways that I am not, you know, running with the herd. With community can also be tribe, with progression, and with rebellion. Pisces in the 12th, oftentimes that's staying with our confusion until clarity comes. You know, with Pisces and Neptune things, there is a moment of clarity when the fog clears, but it requires that we stay in the fog initially. And Pisces in the 12th house has a lot to do with overwhelm and, you know, everythingness all at once. It can also be vision with imagination, universal truth, spirituality. So you get the idea. These are some of the examples of the areas with wherever your Saturn is, and whatever it's touching and working with it. This is really where you've come to say, hey, I want to strengthen this part of me. This part of me needs to be more grounded and more stable. So this brings us to what and how we need to learn, because I think Saturn doesn't, so again, learning can be represented by many areas. So I'm just talking about Saturn here. But to me, because Saturn has a lot to do with lessons in life, Saturn is a big part of our teaching and learning. And it's not just what we need to learn, but how we need to learn. So I'll go through some examples in a minute here. But it represents the parts of us we've come to mature and develop, things that we want to define better or define differently or redefine. It might be that we have a real definition in the area where Saturn touches, but that definition isn't true to us or isn't truly strong. You know, it's built on a principle that is not a strong foundation. You know, it's not part of the core nature of who we are. So then that may be a redefinition that needs to happen. So I just say it doesn't mean that the thing is always lacking. Sometimes it's there, but it needs some rework or redefinition. Sometimes, like for example, with Saturn, we've made things, we talk about Saturn with boundaries or limits, but it's not always that we need to make them tighter. Sometimes we've actually made them too tight, and Saturn says, you know, look at those limits or boundaries and actually expand them. So I know we always think about the restriction side, but thinking more about limits and boundaries and just where they fit best. So it shows where we need to experience our fear, judgment, shame, frustration, limitation, inadequacy, burdens, expectations, all these kinds of things in order to create enough tension to actually do something, right? Like the Saturn in us doesn't want to just talk about it or feel it or go through, you know, a therapy session about it or take a journey with it. Like Saturn wants to account for what's there and do something with it. And oftentimes, for most of us, including me, especially me, it takes a lot to get me to say, wow, I really want to make the effort to do something different. So some examples of what and how we need to learn. And I'm emphasizing the how because it's not just the what, it's the how. So Aries in the first, these are just examples. There's many more for each, but learning to initiate through initiation. So what does that mean? Oftentimes, the thing that we might fear the most with Saturn in the first is initiation, especially initiation of what I really want to do, like with my authentic desire. So, but if the classroom for Saturn is initiation, then if we want to get with the energy, whether it is quote unquote successful or not, it's initiate. Initiate over and over again so that we learn. And one example of initiation or learning through initiation is leadership. And I think that's one reason why, you know, Aries, you know, we see it oftentimes associated with leadership. Taurus, the second house, it's learning to be self-sufficient through lessons of self-sufficiency. So this can be earning money, this can be a variety of things, but those are the kinds of lessons that we're going through to learn to develop and strengthen this. Gemini in the third, learning to communicate through communication. So this can be learning and teaching. But you can see how it's not just enough in my mind to say, I need to strengthen and learn to communicate. It's how. It's actually through that same function. Cancer in the fourth, learning emotional self-sufficiency through lessons of emotional self-sufficiency. This is why parental relationships come up. Leo in the fifth, learn to shine by shining. So this is can be taking the stage, among other things. This doesn't have to be the big Broadway stage. It can be taking the stage as stepping up into, you know, a more leadership role somewhere, or really sharing part of a creative vision, but it's allowing yourself space to shine. Virgo in the sixth, learning to be of service through serving. So hence we get work. Libra and the seventh, learning to relate through relationships. So a lot of the Saturn lessons through this area comes through partnerships. Scorpio in the eighth, learning the power of merging by merging. And this is where we get, you know, shared resources and, you know, deep emotional intimacy and these pieces. Among others, I'm just barely touching the fringe, but I wanted to give enough of information for you to get a feel, and then you can start, you know, if you want, to make your own list of how you might carry that on further. So Sag in the ninth house, learning our personal truth and our personal nature through truth and nature. And so you can see how the exploration of truth through all kinds of philosophies, you know, religions, world exploration falls here, and nature, you know, Sagittarius loves to roam. So we get that gypsy nature. But Saturn sitting here, for example, might be afraid of that nature, but it is that very nature that is the learning path. So in some ways, Saturn is take the uncomfortable road until it becomes more comfortable, and it does. Capricorn in the 10th, learning responsibility through responsibility. So career is an example of this. Aquarius and the 11th house, learning to progress individually and as a community through progression. So here's, we see social environmental causes, working with groups, finding our tribe. And Pisces and the 12th house, learning to surrender through surrendering. This is just one example, and this could be through meditation or a variety of means. Does anybody have anything at this point that you'd like to share, or examples even like in your own life where maybe some of these things are happening? If someone does, I know it helps other listeners to hear more than just me talking about it. Okay, take that as a no. All right, so let's move on with potential contribution to the world. So Saturn reflects some of the ways that we are suited to bring strength to society. And I think the way that we really and truly bring our own strength to society is by developing our own strength in those areas. Saturn benefits and gifts come from the doing and the action of things, not from like the learning about things in a book. And generally, these strengths that we bring to society come after we've gone through many trials in the area, which is really what's required to become an expert, right? It's like if you start a brand new business, you're going to have to try different models and different approaches and change it a lot of times. And if that keeps going and you keep going, you know, a number of years into it, as your company's growing, you start to become an expert in starting up a company and running a company, but through that trial and error process. So I feel like the person who has sat with his or her fears in their most uncomfortable places, which oftentimes, by the way, can be where, you know, Saturn can show that in the chart, where we're uncomfortable. So, and where we're uncomfortable, we tend to overdevelop sometimes or have a rigid structure around it. So we might try to be, especially sometimes, not always, appear especially mature in those areas, and they may actually be our areas where we feel least comfortable. So this person who has sat with his or her fears in the most uncomfortable places, felt his or her own judgment and feelings of pathetic weakness and failure, because we all have those moments, and has found every opportunity to remind him or herself that he or she doesn't measure up. This is the part of the judgment of the part of us that is Saturn, that has stayed through all of this and starts to do what he or she can do to get stronger. That's the person who's earned respect in my mind and in my heart. And so in return, you know, that person truly brings a gift to society, because they've taken the personal time to build that foundation, to build that strength. And then they take that into the world by example, by real example, right? Saturn is about real things. Here's what I really did, what I really tried. Here's what happened here. Here's what happened there. You know, and here's who I am now and where that's moving, right? That's part of the power of Saturn in the world. It's really doing things. We are really doing things through the power of our Saturnian function. So some examples of these potential contributions to the world, and these are very repetitive. So, you know, the first parts I talked about, you can see Aries in the first house and ongoing. I mean, they're similar themes, which we all know, but in a little bit different context. So for me, it helps me remember when I'm working with the Saturn part of me, and when Saturn is actively reflecting things happening in my current life by progression or transit or whatnot. It helps me to have varying examples of, that's right, here's the opportunity here. You know, I have the opportunity to contribute to the world if Saturn is in Aries or the first house, to be a leader, to be a pioneer, to have courageous instinct and to take action. Taurus in the second, to contribute beauty, value, comfort, sensuality, fertility. Gemini in the third, knowledge, communication, wit, variety, duality. You know, that the gift of Saturn and Gemini can be truly being able to be a teacher of the multiple ways of looking at things and the multiple truths in things. So it's interesting, Saturn, for all its known rigidity, can find ways to teach flexibility, right? Because I don't think Saturn in itself is just rigid. It just works with rigidity to get somewhere. There's a difference between being something and working in that area to have an outcome or a goal. And I think of a lot of the things that we tag with Saturn, that's really more the intention, but it just feels like the former. Cancer in the fourth, contributions can be true nurturing, emotional intelligence, belonging, creating a home for people in all kinds of capacity. Leo in the fifth can be expressing creativity, creative products, coming from the heart, sharing the heart, generosity, shining the light on others. So allowing others to feel that bright feeling of being the only and most important thing in that moment, which is a true gift of Leo in the fifth. And again, with Saturn, these are real concrete ways of doing it. Leo in the fifth can also be playfulness. Virgo in the sixth, process improvement, being able to make things just a little bit better. Healing, bringing techniques, true humility. Libra in the seventh, diplomacy, mediation, egalitarianism, harmony, symmetry. In my mind, Libra and the seventh house with Saturn can make such beautiful things in the material plane. There is such an eye for, with Libra in the seventh, of how things are arranged so that they are most beautiful or inviting or appealing to the eye. And that can change things on a big level, because if you're able to do that on bigger and different levels and circles, that brings energy that people are able to work with. People feel the balance in that. Scorpio and the eighth, being a transformer, bringing regeneration, merging, power, control. And I don't mean control in the more negative sense, but I mean control like in the most empowering way of having control. Sagittarius and the ninth, philosopher, bringing truth, motivating people, bringing optimism, taking risks and motivating people to take risks. Here we have the guru or the sage, the person who brings things from different places and different realms and brings different ideas together so that we all have an expansion of consciousness, and that shifts us a little bit into more of who we truly are, because we're able to see and experience more. Capricorn in the 10th can be leadership and also duty. So in Capricorn, duty is a big key here. It can either be the leader or the very dutiful soldier or employee as well. Building empires, because Capricorn is amazing at taking all the resources that are there. It's a yin sign, and it's not creating new things. It's actively taking what's there and synthesizing and building it together to create something new. So I think empires is a good word for that. So oftentimes we see CEOs and people with the big vision over something have Capricorn or 10th house strong signatures. Can be simply contributing responsibility and holding others accountable, and that comes from exemplifying through holding oneself accountable, setting goals and reaching goals. Some of the contributions of Capricorn in the 10th house are actually reaching what we set our sights on. Aquarius in the 11th is activism, can be technology, societal advancement, innovation. We get a lot of amazing inventions and things that come from this energy. And so when I think about Saturn being somewhere and potentially feeling frustration around it, sometimes that can, I guess, translate to, if it was in Aquarius or the 11th house, it could be, feeling like, maybe one shares those ideas and they're not received well, or, afraid that they will be so out there they won't be well received. These are some of the things that come up, but it is actually through that same juice that we reach the place of really starting to bring them to a place where that they are heard. But I just want to stress that these, the potential contribution doesn't generally come day one. It really comes from from having done our inner Saturn work first, then it blossoms on the outside. Pisces in the 12th, visionaries, true visionaries, able to see, cosmically, across all kinds of realms, and to really imagine, to use imagination in all ways, and compassion, flow of spirit. So oftentimes in Pisces in the 12th, we have a lot of creative and artistic things, because in my mind, those are all in the flow of the spirit, whether it's music or art or dance or film. Those things are kind of bridging the worlds of material form with the creative principle, or spirituality, however you like words you like, but that to me fits there. And also faith. Pisces in the 12th house truly has a lot to do with faith. So part of the magic of Saturn truly is reality, real manifestations in our life. So for me, Saturn is really strong in my chart, and Saturn is conjunct my Mercury. So an example of how that plays for me is I manifest my thoughts really quickly, and that is sometimes great and sometimes really does not feel so great. So where Saturn sits, we have manifestation power, and oftentimes until we've sort of come to a place of more trust in ourselves and this foundation and strength, stability, staying I talked about earlier on, oftentimes the things that we manifest in the area aren't necessarily what we would like to see. And that's, I think, helpful, because it really shows us where our mind is, where our feelings are. It's like here's the blessing of all the stuff's going on with me, and here's what I'm making, and here's what I'm seeing in my real life. That actually gives me something to work with. Wait, I don't like that result. I can go change it. So Saturn takes us out from just living in our head or living off of our feelings or emotions, and actually shows us, look, here's what you made. So here's an example. The job we have, for example, is an example of this. So we can ask ourselves, is my job reflective of what I'm wanting to do, my true nature, my natural talents, my, fill in the list. And we can look at the gap of how far between those two are to say where we are in relationship with our manifestation and our true intention, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's not always exciting to see, wow, I created this thing I don't really want, but at the same time, it lets us actually see it and realize where we're really at, because otherwise we can make up a story of, oh, it feels like I've come a long way. It feels like I'm really ready for this new relationship to happen, right? But until we're really in the relationship and honestly look and see what the relationship is like, we don't know where we're at. See, in my mind, Saturn is the power of showing us where we're really at. It's the blessing of beholding the form of our spirit, thoughts, and feelings. If we didn't have form, that there wouldn't be a tangibility to them. And in other planes or realms, we don't care about that so much, but here we're on Earth, we're all about bringing things into form. So we can always tear down and rebuild. I mean, in that respect, it's frustrating, but there's nothing wrong if we don't like the product. It's like anything else in life. So the form our lives are taking, to me, equates to witnessing ourselves in time and space, which I think is kind of cool. Sometimes it's more cool to look at someone else, because we can be a little more objective, but there is something to be said for, how do I witness myself in time and space? And then I can kind of sit with that and say, well, where am I at spiritually or emotionally or mentally with it, and see where it's at. But the actual manifestation shows us something special. So what are you actually doing in the world? What am I doing in the world? I credit Saturn in us for contributing tangible things, for taking on roles, for making something with all the resources that are available to us. And as much as it may not feel like it, where Saturn sits is strength and potential for mastery. It really, really is. It's not like things on the cusp of the second house that are just natural resources we come in with. It's more like stuff that we had like the raw materials for, but we have to actually work it and build it. But when we do, it's super powerful because it's made exactly to our own nature and our own specifications. So build and fill your space with you. I think this is, I talked about this, I think, a little earlier, but I believe that the past and the future converge in the present. So the more that I'm able to be with me, stay with me, fill up with me, even in the most uncomfortable times, that is a huge key to me having capacity in lots of other areas of my life. I can be more available for someone else. I can be more open to have my heart show me a new truth, for example, when I'm able to stay with me. I know, like, I've had moments like where, I don't know, I've gotten flustered around certain things, and I recognize, like, I'm not taking up my space. And I know we all have experiences or versions of this, but wherever you start to feel that, like the Saturn, the density and the strength of Saturn can come in here. It's like, I actually do have weight in my human body, and I have the inherent right to fill up and own my space. So for me, it's huge. I don't have perfect words for it, but it matters, and Saturn to me is linked to it. Okay, and one more. I'm going to pause again because we're 20 minutes to the end, and I will stop at the very end, but does anyone have anything to add at this point? No one? Very quiet group today.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
For conjunctions, Saturn conjunct a planet, can those be read the same way as all of the like the Aries, like say if Saturn's conjunct Mars, would that be?
I do.
The same? Okay.
In fact, with any aspect, I mean, how it flows, like whether it's a, an easier or harder one to be different, but I think the flavor is always there. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Okay, so I'm going to briefly talk about this. This is not my technique, but I did teach it to students a number of years ago, and they were newer students, so it was more difficult for them. But for me, when I heard Gregory Nalbandian talk about this, it was super juicy. And maybe I just like formulas of how things work, but to me, this makes sense. And he talks about Saturn as our builder. So if you were to draw on your paper, like 3 separate columns, the first one you'd write your builder. And your builder is your natal Saturn by sign and house. And then the next column over would be your building material. And that's represented by the north node of the moon. And then the third column over is the new world that you are building. And that's the Pluto polarity point. So for me, my Saturn is in Cancer in the 4th house. That's my builder. And I'll talk more about this in a second. My north node of the moon is in Sagittarius. That's the material my builder has to work with. So you can already see how, for me, Cancer in the 4th house doesn't necessarily want to work with Sagittarius material. So I can already see, I mean, I feel this in my life, but this technique right away, I was like, that so makes sense. I'm trying to work with this material that in my case, for example, is quite a bit different. We're all different with different signatures. And then my Pluto is in the 6th house. So the 12th house is the new world that I'm building. So Saturn is the builder. So when you're thinking about that first little column, these are some of the questions I ask. Well, what does my builder need to be effective? So we'll take mine, for example, Saturn in Cancer in the 4th house. Well, it needs to feel emotionally stable. It needs to have emotional self-sufficiency. It needs to feel probably well-fed, taken care of. It's not going to do well if it probably feels like his feelings are hurt, for example. These are some emotional things around the nature of Saturn in the 4th house. Vulnerability probably would be an issue. So, what might put my builder off course or yours off course? Well, think about that sign and house and aspects and placements, and you can think about that. Well, so for me, if I start to really feel out of my comfort zone, and I don't feel like I'm in a place that's quote unquote home, and I don't feel like people are sensitive to my needs, and I maybe not need what it could be as simple as like there might not be the kind of food that I like to eat, right? I might not feel okay. My builder's not going to be comfortable. And in my case, it's really not going to be comfortable working with Sagittarius material. So another good question is, how much does your builder like the material? Going to be different for each one of us, but good to know what you're working with. So in this technique, Saturn is the key to evolving into the Pluto polarity point. And that happens by choosing the North Node material. So this is another example of how choosing to be and choose and experience things within the sign and house of our North Node helps us to grow. It gives us the material that's going to help us move in the direction of our Dharma. So we don't need to escape our limitations to grow. We're going to grow through them. And that's part of this process here. So our builder's working with new material, which requires all these Saturn traits: patience, endurance, commitment. Actually takes work. We have to face our fear, insecurity, and inhibition. We need to have ambition if we're going to work with new material, and discipline. And then, this will be a little bit different depending on each person's own model. Some energies are more naturally working together than others, and I don't think one's better or worse than the other. It's just kind of what your own alchemy is. And I didn't put a bunch of slides in there, but the place you're going, the new world you're building, is that Pluto polarity point. And so, for example, in my case, if my Saturn builder in Cancer in the 4th house is able to come to a place of emotional self-sufficiency, be my own home, which is so important for me, because if I'm going to work with Sagittarian material, if I'm going to go to a different country, or if I'm going to be somewhere that I know nothing about it, somewhere where I don't speak the language, for example, really expand myself to be in a place that is not known to me, because Sag in 9th house is choosing things that we don't know, so we grow. But if I'm able to be at home with myself, then there's much more capacity for me to choose those Sagittarian things, and then I'm building for myself in those experiences. I'm building that new world that is the Pluto polarity point. So for me, that is, moving from the more controlling my environment of the 6th house to truly surrender and receiving life as it is, right? So for me, that's a huge, huge deal. Potential for wisdom and mastery. So an elder is someone young people want to be around, and this honorable person position is earned through self-mastery, and self-mastery requires no less than patience, determination, and courage to grow through our fears, our inhibitions, and perceived inadequacies. Loneliness and frustration must be faced and experienced, and the only way out is through. This is the path of Saturn. We build our own security, which is our way to freedom. And in my mind, choosing the material of the North Node of the Moon is how we're getting to our path of freedom. And in some ways, the Pluto polarity point is our intention for freedom, right? I mean, it's the intention to move to a new place with more room. So a lot of different definitions for what freedom is, but to me, that is, I'm freeing myself up from my attachment to the past. And I think that this technique for me works that way. So this potential for wisdom and mastery is at the heart of what Saturn represents. It comes through staying, stabilizing, and strengthening. It takes time and commitment. And I like to think of it this way: whatever you want to put in here, fill in the blank, is where I choose to make things happen, earning respect for what I've done for myself and others. So, that blank is filled in differently depending on, of course, your Saturn placement and whatnot. Okay, that's it. And this is just my funny Saturn slide, because when I was living in New York, I was on a subway one day, and this guy had a safety first shirt on, and now he's like my go-to Saturn man. He probably has no idea, but anyway. Okay, so please share, especially what you think about that Saturn as builder. I would love to hear if you've ever used it.
Hi, Tara, it's Wendy. Can you hear me?
Hey, Wendy.
Hi, I loved your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Saturn's always good. I have a Saturn skip step.
Nice.
Good. In the 10th house, retrograde in Pisces.
Wow.
I was thinking about what you said about the builder. So I have Saturn in the 10th. My North Node is Gemini in the 12th.
Hmm.
And so it's always Pisces, 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 Pisces.
Mm-hmm.
Structure with Pisces. I mean, that's a lifelong journey, man. I'm going to tell you right there. That's some serious work.
Yeah.
And I was thinking when you were talking, one of the things that helped me the most in the early years was I got sober when I was 24.
Mm.
I mean, that's Saturn in Pisces.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, that's seriously doing some work. Everything you said about doing the inner work and building.
Yeah. And that's staying, right? Because I think there's a part of you that knows that any of us, that because we all have addictions, whatever kind they are, but to the extent that we use them, I mean, that's us not wanting to stay. You know, that's the exact example of something where I don't want to stay. I'm gonna, and, you know, whether it's food or alcohol or drugs or exercise or work. So
Right.
when you remove that, I mean, you're strengthening your ability to stay. I mean, to me, like that's a perfect example, and it.
Yeah, it made me think of it. And the thing is that I mean, that was it. I was 24. It was either change or die.
Yeah.
Either I'm going to
Yeah.
plan it or I'm going to change. And I just gave everything I had to it. I mean, it gave me the structure. Literally, the 12 steps gave me the structure. At the time, I didn't have any. I didn't have any structure. I mean, my whole structure was falling apart.
Yeah.
So that laid the foundation for all kinds of spiritual awakenings and all kinds of stuff to happen, which did activate my North Node in the 12th.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing how, like, with the North Node, like it truly, like, in my mind, when we're really doing our work, you know what I mean? Like when we're really doing the work of what our inner planets represent, I think like that in some ways that naturally unfolds. I mean, we can choose the material and choose it, but the North Node is not like one day we say I'm going to be this. It's what we're developing into. So, you know, like you said, by you doing that, you just naturally start to move in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, there were circumstances and all kinds of things that led to it, right? I mean, there's so many pieces that brought it all together, but from that, it really helped me find my own spiritual center and my own inner mastery. Of course, it led to all of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, there's many, many layers to all that. I still have Saturn themes I'm working on. I mean, that's going to be lifelong for me.
Me too. Yeah, it's probably why I talk about it, because it's like so much of where I live. Where's your Pluto, Wendy?
Exactly opposite in the 4th.
That's right, you were 4th. Yeah, so how would you say, like, so your new world being the 10th, I mean, that is, I mean, all those things you're describing to me, I mean, that is the responsibility if I'm going to, you know, take charge of my life versus escape my life.
I mean, it's complex, right? Because I have so many planets involved in all of that, squaring
Yeah.
Venus, Uranus, Chiron. So for me now, it always comes down to taking full psychic responsibility for my soul. And for me, it's, I mean, because I see all this stuff that other people don't see and feel. So I'm always having to work in that realm and boundaries and, you know, moving out of my fear that I'm not going to be accepted in the collective or whatever the crap is, that I'm going to get crucified for, you know, being out there and all of those. It's basically moving through fear.
Yeah.
Facing the fear and going, you're the boogeyman and I'm not going to give you any power and I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
Even after like losing everything and starting all over, whatever the story is, right? So for me currently, I just got invited to do animal communication readings at the store, and I'm really excited about that. And so I've stepped into a whole nother place. And so all of my gifts, everything that I've been working on all these years, there it is again. Like I helped find a lost cat last night, last week, and another one. And it's just like flowing, and I'm like, oh, and I love it. It's so much fun, right? When we show up for what we're really meant to do.
Yeah. And it's just taking you some time, I think, like, I mean, so many of us, that for that truly to be the gift externally, I mean, in my mind, like, it's not going to come to full fruition until we do the internal work, because that's what it's meant to be. It's meant to be like our inner embodiment, like, pours out. But that's so beautiful when you can say that. I mean, now it's fun and all these things. Those are words we don't normally use with Saturn, but that's what it leads to. And I think there's a huge self-satisfaction that comes from that doesn't come from many other things in life.
Right. I mean, so I've had a definite hatred relationship with Saturn, but that's only when I'm like stuck in the fourth.
Yeah.
In all of the Virgo pain, which, you know, I mean, and another thing I'll just say is, you know, last week this huge family secret came up. I mean, your talk on Cancer and Pluto in the fourth helped me so much.
Yeah.
It just was great. And I decided, I was like, you know what? I mean, this was huge, a huge thing that came out. And I felt sick for a week, like I could barely function. And then I was like, you know what? No, this is taking so much of my life. No freaking way am I getting one more ounce of energy to this. I'm moving forward. This is where my life is going. And everything's going in a good place. And there's no way I'm going to let this stop me. It's just a test. Because I said the week before, oh, I'm ready. I'm ready, right, to step out.
Yeah.
And then this thing comes up, this big, ugly thing. I was like, uh-oh. You know, and it's like, oh, no, I have enough knowledge. I have enough wisdom to walk around it.
To me, that's exciting, because that's another example of, I mean, you stayed with everything you just described to me. I could feel you stay with yourself even through the days when you were like, you know, kind of through you a little bit, but you stayed, right? That's the thing, you stayed through it. So
Saturn and Pisces right there. That's me saying, no, I'm going to stick with the higher vibration of Pisces. I'm not going to stick with all this mucking up of the past and all the trauma and all of this stuff. And actually, people have been like having serious meltdowns this week, like everywhere. I'm like, holy crap! And I'll just hang out with the miracles.
Yeah, but Wendy, how wonderful for you not just be able to be an example of being the stronger, you know, staying responsible, but you also, because you know the other side, like, you have real experience and compassion for the people that are not there yet. And I think that's what really helps people get there. You know, people need to know that we get, you know, like, that we get that, and not just from talking about it, but that we've felt it and experienced it. And you now are starting to have this whole range, so you can meet people in so many places where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's absolutely a really true thing. I just have to keep a real fine line, because I'm so empathic and I can be so compassionate that I get stuck there. I can feel their feelings, and then I don't, you know, so it's oh my God, the boundaries of Pisces. I mean, you know.
There are no boundaries of Pisces, are you kidding?
That's Saturn in the 10th retrograde in Pisces. You've got to have them. I mean, being in your body, right? Staying in your core. I mean, those are the boundaries, energetic boundaries are there.
Yeah, and just letting the rest be everywhere, right? That's the thing. Like, you can't harness everything. All you can do is give yourself some definition. I mean, that's it. Not easy.
Yeah, right.
Thanks for sharing that. I really like hearing your story.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything to share? Linda, are you there?
Yes.
Do you have anything to add? We're probably right about the end.
Yeah, I have written a few notes here that Saturn can lead to great satisfaction, but you already said that, so that's why I didn't sort of chime in. And it can bring all our various talents together. And I'm finding that Saturn gets better in time. So the second Saturn return is pretty amazing. I mean, Saturn gets really bad rap, doesn't it?
Yes.
But it can be one of the most satisfying planets to dance with. And so
Yeah, thank you. I didn't use the word satisfying till the very end. It wasn't in my presentation, so maybe you just like sent that over to me.
I think so. Yeah. So, any comments from anyone else, or?
Well, thank you for letting me share my my little journey with Saturn.
Oh, it was
Thanks, Laura.
brilliant.
I wanted to say you've made me appreciate. I have an opening quintile between my Saturn in Scorpio and my Pluto in Leo, and you've made me appreciate it a lot more.
Oh, good.
I realize a lot more about it listening to you.
Thank you for sharing.
I have a quick question if you have time.
Yeah.
What would you have to say for those of my generation who have the Saturn, Uranus, Neptune conjunct in Capricorn?
I don't know what I would say on the fly. Saturn, Uranus, Neptune conjunction. You know, the thing about Uranus and Neptune is that they're, at least in this is just what I'm going to say off the cuff of what I feel about just those three. I'm not going to take it any further than that. But Neptune and Uranus are really out there. And by that, I mean, you know, we can't see them. They're other realms. It's, you know, long-term memories with Uranus. It is information from all different places, realms, you know, different kinds of beings, different levels, different frequencies. And when you put Saturn with that, like Saturn's always asking us to give something form. So I think that whole generation in some ways is here to take some of those less tangible things and to somehow make them real. And that's a big task, you know, and maybe that's because we're at a time where, I mean, frankly, we're lost in lots of ways. And the answer is not spiritual bypass or to leave it, it's how can we bring those things in? And so I think that would be my initial take without giving it a lot more thought, but yeah.
Yeah, it actually supports my North Node, Pisces, 5th house.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know, I think that the gift of bringing our spiritual nature individually and collectively into form, you know, and into creative expression is what inspires us, I think, all to keep going. You know, that's big. It's big, and it's weird because it's working with something that really doesn't have definition. So there can be the side, I think, that oftentimes we feel like, well, how can I give form or definition to something that has no boundary, has no limit, that doesn't even have, you know, words to go with it? But if we can give little slivers or pieces, then, you know, people get a little breath or sound or feeling of that bigger oneness, and whether they recognize it or not, you know, that's spirituality. So spirituality doesn't have to be like, you know, some form. It can be as simple as that, and I think that we need that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Would you all please thank Tara Owl?
Gracias.
De nada.
Thank you, Tara.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
See you later.